You want to know my biggest fear with Iowa football right now, Mark? And it's got nothing. It does have something to do with Brian, but as much as we've ranted and raved about Brian Ferentz and the offense over recent weeks, my biggest fear with Iowa, and we've talked about this to an extent, is that what we have discussed comes true. Iowa makes a decision on a staff change a year late. You have USC and UCLA joining the conference. You have the divisions going bye-bye. You have NIL only gaining traction. I don't know how much further what's going to end up happening with NIL and what rule changes may come down the line, down the pipeline, but it's not going away, right? You can't put toothpaste back in the bottle. And what I fear will happen is that Kirk walks away, whether it be after this year or after 2024, and Iowa is in a very, very precarious position, and it's almost like trying to row a boat upstream. You just get stuck so far down, and it's just an uphill battle. And the further you get back, the harder it is to gain that ground back. And that's what I worry about. And that's why a lot of Wisconsin fans, they are like the contrast of Iowa. For years, people grouped Iowa and Wisconsin as parallel programs. And now they have taken very opposite approaches. And we'll see which one works out, Mark. But I think the fear from Iowa fans, my fear, is that they made the proactive decision and they said, we like the stability that Paul Chryst has brought here, albeit not to the level or the length of time that Kirk Ferentz has achieved it at Iowa, but certainly from a win-loss perspective, year in and year out, Paul Chryst was achieving what Kirk Ferentz has been achieving at Iowa. They said, we're not satisfied with that. We don't want to become complacent. We understand what's coming in the next couple of years. We need to prepare. Iowa's not really preparing for that. Not that I can see from the outside looking in. I don't know what preparation Iowa has made as it really, besides getting that NIL collective formed, which credit to Kirk to an extent. I brought that up earlier. Coaches deserve some credit with how their NIL collectives operate or don't operate. But Brad Heinrichs and that crew, they've done a tremendous job. Besides that, and that was really not something that Kirk wanted to do. It was one of those things he had to do. I do worry that Iowa's not preparing for that future and not taking a proactive approach to things. And that does start with the staff, and it comes down to attitude with recruiting. It comes down to schematics and your stylistic approach. All those things come into play.
There have been at least 5 times during the show in which at the conclusion of your statement, I was about to make a point, and then you took it down the same path that I was about to. So you just brought up a school that I was going to ask you, okay, before you brought up that school, I was going to say, what program would you most closely align to Iowa?
Right now?
Yes. Or in the last 10 or 15, 20 years even.
I mean, Wisconsin.
Right? Bam. There you go. I'm right there with you. And I think that's anybody that follows college football closely, for a number of reasons, playing in the same division, same conference, being very like programs in terms of their approach, their style. In the past, again, Wisconsin's taken a break. They have been more aggressive, more assertive, pointing toward the future. But Hair Trigger makes the comment here, Kirk's only had 3 seasons at Iowa that were under 500. That's pretty impressive. I agree, for the level of program, really. However, during that same period of time, how many losing seasons has Wisconsin had? I'll tell you, none.
Yeah. And they, so what are they doing, Mark? Are they saying we don't care about stability by making this move? Is this a huge risk move for Wisconsin? I mean, is it? I'm just curious. Is what Wisconsin's doing with what they did, getting Luke Fickell to come and changing their approach, is that a big risk? Are they taking a huge risk?
No.
Why?
Because they just are they taking a risk? Yeah, anytime you do something different than the way you've done it successfully in the past, that's a risk. But for me, the head coaching hire was not a risk. They made the best head coaching move of the offseason. Now, does he have a 20-year track record? No. But he's the best coach on the market. They got him. If they have made a tactical error in their offensive approach, I think that can be corrected fairly easily.
But they fired Paul Chryst before Luke Fickell was lined up, right? We believe that.
Oh yeah.
We don't
Uh,
believe that those conversations were occurring to where they knew, hey, we got Luke Fickell.
Unless something comes out that's similar to what happened with USC and Lincoln Riley, where we found out later that USC was talking to Lincoln Riley mid-season.
I have a hard time. I mean, the thing about it is, what would that say about Jim Leonard? I mean the perception, if that's the case, then Wisconsin hid that really well, because I think a lot of people expected Jim Leonard to take over. So the reason I bring that, what's that? Say it.
It's probably not the case. I'm just telling you that we do have an example of that going on.
So my point is, Mark, they didn't have Luke Fickell lined up. And maybe they thought Jim Leonard was a safe hire as well. And they found out, hey, we can go get Luke Fickell. That's even safer with a higher ceiling than what we believe Jim can do for us. It's possible. Maybe that's what happened. They had a lot of confidence in Jim Leonard, and they knew he was a fallback. And Iowa doesn't have that. That's fine. We can argue that Iowa doesn't have that. I'm not. And by the way, I'm not advocating for Kirk to be fired. Don't believe me. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not saying Iowa needs to take the exact approach that Wisconsin did, but Wisconsin parted ways with Paul Chryst, we assume, prior to conversations with Luke Fickell. So that is a big swing. That's a big risk. What they did, from a perspective of, they didn't have a guy lined up. It's not like they had a guy that they knew was. I mean, Luke Fickell is as safe of a hire as you can have. But I don't think maybe they believed in Jim Leonard to that extent. But I'm just saying they didn't know who was going to be the next head coach when they made that fire, when they parted ways with Paul.
No, I think those are two different things. I think that they may have fired Paul. I think it's likely, highly likely, 90% likely or more, that they fired Paul Chryst and inserted Jim Leonard, not knowing who their next coach was going to be. But at the point that they decided Jim Leonard's not going to be the next head coach, I believe it's fairly likely that at that point they did know it was going to be Luke Fickell.
Well, I mean,
so
sure.
Those can be two different things.
Well, what's that got to do with anything?
Well, them taking the risk to fire Paul Chryst, yes, that is a risk.
Yes.
But they are Wisconsin. They can get a capable coach, and I believe that they were truly auditioning Jim Leonard to see how he handled the last 7 or 8 games of the season, whatever the number was, something in that range. And then they either determined he didn't meet our standard, or under other conditions, we would have kept him. However, we think we can get Luke Fickell, or we have talked to Luke Fickell and we've got him.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that. Here's what I'll say. You just made a comment, and I know you're probably going to agree with my stance on this, but you made a comment a second ago. Well, they're Wisconsin. They knew they could attract somebody. So there's the difference. So Wisconsin said, we get rid of Paul Chryst. We are confident in who we are. We are comfortable with who we are. We're confident in who we are as a program, as a university. And that's something Iowa can't say. I mean, I just know a lot. Maybe some on the inside feel that way, but I hear from people on the outside all the time who say we have to just appreciate what we have, because go back and remember the Lauterbur days. And, I'm serious. I mean, you hear this, Mark. This is out there. And that's, it goes back to the conversations about, well, we could always be Nebraska. My point is, I think there's a lot of people inside and outside the Iowa program that believe without Kirk and without Hayden, this program is, and to an extent, they're right. Like where the program was when both of those guys took over, both those guys elevated things. But I think there's a lot of people who believe it's going to be almost impossible to do better than either of those guys. That's the mindset. But what you just said, if that's accurate or reflecting how Wisconsin feels or how they felt in making that move with Paul Chryst, is they said, we're comfortable. We know we can go get somebody. We're comfortable making a change. And we're not afraid of rocking the boat, because we are stable. We are a commodity, a valuable commodity to college football. And I don't think there's enough people around the Iowa program that feel like Iowa's real valuable to the college football world. Because if there was, I mean, there might be a little bit. I'm not saying, again, I'm not advocating for Kirk to be fired, but if there was, one would think Kirk would not be allowed to do what he's doing as it relates to Brian. There would be, I think Iowa would be in a position to where they can leverage Kirk, as I said months and months ago before the season ever ended, leverage Kirk and saying, no, Kirk, you're going to do, we love you. We respect you. We've given you a lot of power here, but you've gone too far with this. We want you to be our head coach, but you need to do this. As either Gary Barta or the president or whoever, right? Whoever is supposed to be overseeing Kirk Ferentz could use that leverage. You get where I'm coming with this, Mark?
I'm right there with you. Yep.
But I don't think that's the mindset. I think the mindset is we're fearful of where we could go.
Yeah.
And we're fearful of what happens after Kirk. Wisconsin was not fearful of what would happen after Chryst. And part of that is because Iowa's had 2 coaches in 43 years. Wisconsin had a bunch of coaches over the course of many years. And that's part of it, right? And they got used to winning under different personalities. Iowa has not had that, for better or worse.
Yeah, I'm going to make a statement that people are going to disagree with to a certain extent, but I want to make it clear that I'm not making a definitive statement like I'm saying this is true for sure. I'm just saying there's an argument that can be made, and it's a pretty easy one to make, that Paul Chryst had a better tenure at Wisconsin than Kirk has had at Iowa.
I think winning percentage he did.
Oh, correct. He's got a much better winning percentage.
And he had how many division titles?
2014, 16, 19, 3 division titles in 7 years.
Yeah, and Kirk has had 2 in, 11?
And more regularly higher rankings, better bowl record, just in a shorter period of time. So I'm not saying that he should be given as much credit, because it's difficult to sustain that for a longer period of time. And he was certainly given a much better program. So I'm just saying that that argument can be made that Paul Chryst had a better tenure than Kirk has at Iowa, and he was let go.
And maybe, Mark, maybe Wisconsin is just a better program than Iowa, regardless of coach. Maybe that's the case, and maybe the fears from Iowa people, at least the fans, and I think it's reflected in how the administration has operated. Perhaps Wisconsin's just in a better. It's just a better program.
Should it be? Though?
No, I don't know why it is. I don't know why it is.
Are there that many more people that live in Wisconsin? Do they have that much better high school football players? None of that.
I think they probably have better high school football, but Iowa high school football has been better in recent years. And let's not forget, Wisconsin also has to compete with, well, maybe they don't compete, but I think to an extent they do. They got a pro football team right there in Green Bay. Mm-hmm. That's a factor. And they don't have a Wisconsin State, right? They don't have another big-time football program that they have to compete with, unlike Iowa and Iowa State. But they don't have Iowa does not have a pro sports team, and that's advantage Iowa. And Don Patterson has talked about that. And he used that as leverage in recruiting. Back when he was recruiting back in his home state of Texas, he'd tell kids, "Hey, these are the Dallas Cowboys of Iowa," because Dallas is always America's team. The Hawkeyes are Iowa's team. It's the Hawkeye State. So I don't buy into the notion that Iowa is just this mediocre program that's been elevated because of 2 people. And I have great respect for both of those people, Hayden Fry and Kirk Ferentz. And by the way, I don't think Hayden Fry I don't believe Hayden Fry would have approved of some of what Kirk's doing right now. I think Kirk has a lot of respect for Hayden Fry. But if Hayden were around now, I don't know how he would respond. I didn't know Hayden personally. But Hayden, for the most part, his reputation at Iowa in the 20-some years he was here, he did what was best for the program. Kirk has done that for most of his tenure, but I'd say over the last few seasons, you could question that. And the moment a head coach stops doing what's best for the football program, he deserves to be criticized in my mind. I don't buy into the notion that Iowa is some subpar, mediocre program that is just living off the coattails of 2 men. I believe life after Kirk Ferentz, as it relates to Iowa football, will go on. However, I do fear him leaving at a very inopportune time. And the potential for having those fears realized as Iowa fans, having the fears that Iowa is just a mediocre program, having those fears realized if Kirk leaves at the wrong time or waits too long to make the right changes. That's where I'm coming from with all this.
Yeah, I think all of that is valid. And in the meantime, I was looking up, I was curious. There's the population of the two states. So, how much of a factor is that? I think it is a factor. Most of the major programs in the country play in fairly populous states.
By
But
the way, Mark,
again, they have to share attention with the Green Bay Packers and not even share it, be overshadowed by it.
you are the voice of college football. You want to talk about Wisconsin football in the 80s and 90s? I mean,
Well, in the 80s up until 1993, that was the breakthrough.
so but I mean, talk about it because everybody wants to talk about Lauterbur, and let's realize that a lot of programs that are really strong now had really dark pasts and had eras where they were bad football programs. Wisconsin at one time was a bad football program. So was Iowa. That happens. That doesn't mean we're destined to return there. That's I think that's the attitude difference. Wisconsin's not afraid of returning to that era, or they wouldn't have made the change that they did. I agree with 750 donuts of doom in our chat. I agree.